Should we be able to alter
embryonic DNA?
Where do we draw the line between improving the child's quality of life and implementing a parent's preferences on their child?
What are the possible benefits and drawbacks of germline engineering? Germline engineering is altering the DNA in germ cells or early embryos to change the genotype and therefore phenotype of the resulting child. Germline engineering can also be called pre-implantation embryonic genetic modification when referring to genetic alterations in embryonic DNA. PGM occurs during in vitro fertilization, which is when the egg is fertilized outside of the body, typically in a test tube or petri dish. This topic has always been controversial as it brings up many ethical dilemmas, but has never been more of a reality than in the past few years since Jennifer Doudna co-invented the CRISPR-Cas9 technology, which stands for Clustered Regularly Interspaced Short Palindromic Repeats Associated 9. This method modifies DNA much more simply and efficiently than ever before. CRISPR was discovered in bacteria and archaea, both prokaryotes, which use the Cas9 protein as their immune system. It recognizes the DNA of invading viruses and acts like a nuclease to destroy those foreign pathogens. That viral DNA can be taken and placed into a site on the chromosome of the bacteria, which is called the CRISPR site, protecting the cells from viruses. This protection or immunity is passed down. Scientists have applied this concept to humans and discovered that the Cas9 protein can be easily altered to recognize different DNA sequences so they can make very controlled and specific alterations in the subject's DNA. Once the DNA has been cleaved, it can be put back together either by reattaching the two segments or a new segment of DNA being inserted between them. In order to cut a gene out of the human genome, no extra segments of DNA would be added, so that once the segment was cut, the two separate segments would go back together without the removed gene, allowing scientists to remove genes that cause diseases. Scientists can also add genes or specific DNA segments to alter or replace genes coding for certain traits. For example, if there are a mutation in a person's DNA, scientists could program the Cas9 to cleave the DNA in such a way that the mutation would be cut out and the strands could reconnect without the mutant DNA, and with other DNA instead. The Cas9 protein works in assistance with the CRISPR RNA, which helps the Cas9 bind to the DNA strand and helps the nuclease make its cut. Transactivating RNA acts similarly to a cofactor, meaning that it enables the nuclease to make its cut. Along with the CRISPR technology being used for disease prevention and cures, it can also eventually be used for changing physical attributes such as making a person stronger or changing their eye or hair color, which brings up many ethical questions as to which genes, if any, should be legal to modify. This still isn't possible for all traits right now because scientists haven't figured out which genes code for each trait, but once scientists know which DNA segments to target, we will be able to alter any of that DNA. So far, this technology has been used on mice, on monkeys, to destroy DNA of HIV viruses, and, in China, on human embryos. The CRISPR technology can be used in both adult cells and embryonic cells, although it's more efficient in pre-implantation embryos. This technology is superior to other gene-altering technologies of the past because it is significantly more simple and efficient compared to previous technologies that many of the high-end labs weren't willing to use. With more research on embryonic cells, scientists could find ways to cure many diseases and improve the quality of life of many people, but there are still many ethical issues questioning whether or not this process should be allowed.
Now that we have the capability to do more specialized genome editing in gametes and embryos, research has become more widely accepted but remains an ethical question. News about preliminary germline modification experiments conducted at Sun Yat-sen University in southern China surfaced in 2015. This report gathered national attention and sparked discussions about the matter in major global think tanks. Some of the most influential organizations in the industry released statements sharing their positions on the new field of genetic research. In April of 2015, the National Institutes of Health announced they would not be funding germline alteration projects in human embryos in the United States. The National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine followed up by issuing their initiative to research and discuss the ethical and health concerns of germline alteration in May. An important address by the White House Office of Science and Technology explained, "The White House fully supports a robust review of the ethical issues associated with using gene editing technology to alter the human germline. The administration believes that altering the human germline for clinical purposes is a line that should not be crossed at this time. Outside of the US, these conversations occurred in the context of the United Nations, who released an updated report on the human genome in October, containing their ethical and scientific standpoints on the new technology. They have issued a moratorium on the genetic engineering of the human genome, which means countries in the UN will abide by a temporary prohibition of the process. Because germline modification is a relatively new phenomenon, laws and regulations about them are just beginning to be formed. This graphic was created by Biomed Central in 2014 to organize and display the moral and scientific perspectives of different parts of the world on the matter. The dark pink areas are countries who have legislative bans on germline alteration. Those filled in with light pink have federal guidelines, and the light gray ones have restrictive instructions pertaining to the use and research of this field of genetics. The dark gray countries have ambiguous stances on the matter, and those not filled in haven't addressed the ethical dilemma. As shown, most countries haven't made statements regarding germline modification, but of those who have, it's clear that many, especially in Europe, have made the decision to officially ban it with legislation. As indicated by its light gray color, the US has placed restrictions on researchers who are looking into the field of germline engineering. Each organization involved in the distribution of funding to clinical trials has a different standard of eligible projects. Some only fund non-human experiments. Overall, it's clear the field of germline modification has fascinated and challenged the world with its moral and scientific depth.
Germline engineering, pre-implantation genetic modification, and CRISPR technology bring up many ethical questions including, does CRISPR technology qualify as eugenics? Do humans have the right to determine a person's traits? And is it worth it to test on humans, animals, and embryos when we could be harming test subjects for no reason? By using the CRISPR technology to alter the genomes of embryos, scientists can make the resulting child immune to diseases or prevent the child from contracting diseases such as HIV, cancer, Huntington's, and cystic fibrosis. Scientists can use the CRISPR technology to cut out genes for certain diseases such as cystic fibrosis, as well as cutting out mutations and replacing mutated with new DNA. They can replace a gene coding for a specific phenotype with a different version of the gene, different allele, changing the phenotypic characteristic of the resulting person. Many scientists argue that being able to cure diseases allows for those children to have a better quality of life and also makes the lives of their families easier. Dr. Fang, a biologist at MIT's McGovern Institute for Brain Research, said that the goal of science is to reduce suffering, which could be possible through germline engineering. Because germline engineering can prevent and cure deadly and otherwise incurable diseases, many people believe that scientists should save as many lives as possible by using the new technology. Another reason many people ethically believe in pre-implantation embryo genetic modification is that once the DNA has been altered, this alteration is passed on through the generations, making all offspring of the genetically modified child immune to certain diseases, which could eradicate such diseases altogether. On the other hand, many argue that the scientists don't have the right to play God and determine which genes the child has, whether they're preventing diseases or not. According to a Pew Research study from last August, 46% of adults believed it was ethically okay to alter the genes of embryos if the modification was being used to cure a disease.
Another concern regarding embryonic gene modification is that it could lead to more applications of the new CRISPR technology to make modifications in the DNA that can result in parents choosing the characteristics of their child. Many also worry that because diseases are nature's way of keeping the population in check, with immunity being passed down through generations, the eradication of many diseases could result in overpopulation. New curative technologies are also an economic problem because they're so expensive that only a small amount of the population would be able to afford them. In vitro fertilization, or IVF, already costs about $20,000, and with the new technologies, it costs even more, making cures for these diseases extremely expensive. Although these procedures can cure diseases, it might only be benefiting the wealthy by ensuring their longer lives and could give them yet another advantage over everyone else. Because the altered traits can be passed down, if a mistake is made, that altered, possibly negative gene would also be passed down through the generations, and scientists haven't yet found a way to alter DNA just for a single person. Because they can't alter the DNA for just one generation of people, it brings up the ethical questions about testing and trials with the CRISPR technology and other genetically modifying processes. So far, success with the technology has been found while testing on monkeys and mice, which some view as risking the lives of animals for the greater good of the people, while others argue that we should value every life the same regardless of whether or not it's a human life. The testing strategies of genetic modification on humans is still dangerous and has resulted in many complications and deaths, which is not only a dilemma because people are being harmed by the process, but also because if one believes that the goal is not ethical, they view the testing as an unethical process towards the unethical goal.
Because we found a system that can be easily adjusted to target any gene that we know how to code for, parents could be able to play a role in the physical attributes of their child, such as hair color, eye color, and athletic or mental abilities. The parents who believe such choice should be legal claim that they can give the child a better quality of life if they're more similar to the child, or parents are fascinated with the idea of creating a super child. The environment that this type of modification could create demonstrates what's desirable and what isn't, and allows for parents to have more control and be more emotionally invested in the success of their child as an investment rather than their baby. However, some couples sharing a birth defect can desire their child to have the same quality because they don't view this trait as a negative part of who they are, or because they will be easier to care for. For example, for two deaf parents, it might be more difficult to raise a child with perfect hearing, and they could potentially want to alter that child's DNA to make their child deaf as well. Preferential genetic modification also puts the wealthy class even more at an advantage because they could much more easily modify their children to be smarter, more athletic, and more ideal, giving them a higher likelihood of success in life. It is also argued that the wealthy have already worked for their money, so they have the right to pass on that privilege to their children. The process also involves complicated and possibly dangerous procedures for something that isn't medically necessary. However, some medically unnecessary processes, such as plastic surgeries, are allowed because they're at the choice of the person receiving them.
One of the major concerns with this type of embryonic genetic modification is whether or not it's considered eugenics, the science of improving the stock. The reason this question is so controversial is that this philosophy is what justified Hitler's actions towards the inferior races, quote unquote, in the mid-20th century. As well as discrimination and segregation in America, the slaughter of people seen as inferior was justified by saying they were weeding out, quote unquote, the bad traits in the gene pool, which could be seen as similar to what scientists are doing when they alter the DNA, because the parents would decide which traits are desirable enough to keep and which they don't want in their child's genome. Some scientists, however, argue that the personal choice about the traits of a child won't result in the same segregation and discrimination because individuals are deciding what they want in a child as opposed to the government enforcing a mentality or opinion on the people. According to the Pew Research Survey, only 17% of adults believe that genetic modification to enhance the intelligence of a baby would be acceptable, demonstrating that the majority of the public isn't open to begin enhancing traits where they're not medically necessary, but the parent's preference. As a group, we believe preferential gene modification that can be classified as eugenics should not be legalized. This type of motive behind the decision to edit the genome of a zygote is based purely off choice and not necessity. Because we are able to edit and replace any gene we know the code for, the possibilities for changing traits like eye color, height, intelligence, and physical capability are at our fingertips. This idea originated from Hitler's interest in the science of improving the stock, or weeding out what he thought were inferior races. This truly horrifying notion is closely connected to preferential gene modification because once we determine the ideal phenotypes, participants will contribute to the limitation of the amount of variation in the human race. The ability to engineer this so-called perfect child comes only to the ones able to afford the extremely expensive procedures. This could generate another layer of division and inequality of opportunity between classes. Another variation on this preferential motive for germline alteration is based on the parents' desire for a more simple or easy upbringing of their child. Providing a child with a physical or mental disability that may make them less challenging to care for would be possible within this medical field. However, the passing on of unfavorable traits that will possibly decrease the patient's quality of life should at least require consent, if not be prohibited. Because these procedures must be done at an early stage, it's obvious that the person whose life is being altered would never be able to give informed consent. The idea of a genetically modified baby sounds frightening and is especially when it is molded directly to its parents' liking.
Germline alteration could, however, contribute to the world of medicine in a very positive way. We will eventually have the capability to cure fatal or irreparable diseases with this technology, and that possibility should not be ignored.
As of right now, these procedures are in their early stages of development and are most definitely too risky to be implemented in a real clinical trial to observe their long-term effects. Once we have solidified evidence of positive effects on the receiver, had adequate research done about the long-term effects of the implementation of CRISPR-Cas9, and determined there is no other feasible cure for the genetic disorder the patient will be treated for, germline engineering may be actualized. But this will likely not be a reality for quite some time, and will be a hard reality to come to, both ethically and technologically.